Welcome back into the Pig Trail Show. Another Sunday means another Hog Hoops report. That's Kevin McPherson. I'm Jacob Morrison. Kevin, finally, we've got the schedule complete for the Razorbacks. On Monday, Arkansas adding that UTSA game to complete the non-con slate, and we have a full view of what the entire Razorbacks schedule looks like. What were your big takeaways from that?
Well, just that Arkansas did not add a marquee
Yep.
game for a fifth non-conference marquee matchup. We were dreaming about that for several segments leading up to the big announcement. It didn't even come from the University of Arkansas. UTSA put its schedule out, non-conference December 7th matchup in Bud Walton Arena. So early December. And look, it splits up that road game at Miami in the ACC SEC Challenge on December 3rd. And then that game in New York City in the Jimmy V Classic against Michigan at Madison Square Garden on the 10th. So you've got a mid-major at home in between there. It was an interesting stretch of games because even before those games, you have Illinois and the Turkey Throwdown on Thanksgiving Day, November 28th. So before the UTSA news, you had back-to-back away from home games against marquee matchups. We know Baylor was the last of the marquee for non-con that we heard about a couple of weeks ago. That's the end of the first week of the season, November 9th in Dallas. But Arkansas does not add a fifth marquee game. They've had matchups against marquee teams in two consecutive seasons. They've had five. Kentucky seemed to always have five or more under Cal. This year, you're sticking with four. Now, it's a loaded SEC slate. We know that. And that's true for every team that plays in the league. And I think Arkansas's road games in that are a little tougher than the home games, meaning a lot of quad one win opportunities out there, but also maybe playing more on the road against teams at the top. So I don't know if that factored into the scheduling or if it was just one of those things where they had something maybe that they thought they could get done that didn't quite work out. I do know one thing very, very interesting. On Monday, when we learned about that matchup, within the hour, USC, Southern California, put out its non-conference schedule. And you talk about weak and soft. It's maybe arguably one of the softest for a high major school in the country. It's up there. It's in competition for one of the worst. And we know conservatively, Eric Patrick Melsman, EPM and his staff, Anthony Ruda, who's always done really the bulk of the scheduling for his teams, and now he's with him at USC. They're very conservative in their scheduling. We're not here to talk about USC. We're talking about Arkansas. I just found the timing of that very interesting because I always wondered aloud, was that maybe a program among a handful of teams that Arkansas was trying to work in a home and away, and what a big storyline that would have been to get Melsman back into Bud Walton Arena sometime in November or December. But this also, when I look at recruiting and what's ahead, I think scheduling is going to matter in terms of up front and center 2020 class of 2025 recruiting, Jacob. And something else interesting, the school has not officially put out a schedule yet. We know the opponent's done a lot of work to confirm a lot of dates and teams. Some of it's I've reported first, some of it's from some of the national guys. But we cobbled it together. I feel confident that we had the schedule right. I even wrote an article that was on Pig Trail Nation over at hogville.net. I listed all 31 games, non-con and SEC. Then I ranked the top 20. I was very, I had a method to my madness. You can go check that content out. Came out earlier last week, but the school still hasn't put out a schedule, and I've got some thoughts on that.
Yeah. We were talking a little bit before we got on here about visits potentially for Arkansas, obviously, and specifically with the exhibition stuff. I know you were looking at potentially what Arkansas might be going, the direction they might be going in with a couple of those dates, and how they might tie into potential recruiting visits as well.
Yeah, we've heard Calipari at various occasions over the last couple of months, at times when talking about schedule, bring up that Arkansas TCU came up and playing in Dallas. Well, TCU's home court is technically in Fort Worth. Maybe he's talking about a road exhibition game there. He talked about trying to add and finalize a game with Kansas. Well, John Rothstein, I believe it was, kind of firmed up. Yeah, there's going to be a charity exhibition game at Bud Walton Arena in Fayetteville against Kansas. We've seen no playing dates. Typically, your two exhibition games are played in October. You also have your red-white game that's played in October, and that is also an event that Arkansas has used in the past with previous coaching staffs to bring in recruits on weekends where they're playing red-white games, exhibition games. And so we've seen what this past weekend that we just went through, Arkansas at one point was thought to be bringing in three different five-star players. And slowly but surely, those names started to peel off from this weekend, including the last guy, Koa Pete, a 5-star out of Arizona, 6'7", 6'8", combo forward, ranked 5th in the country, 5-star in that 2025 class. Highly sought after guy. And Arkansas has been a place he told me back in May he was definitely going to visit. Great relationship with Calipari. They scheduled him for September 13th to the 15th. That would have been this weekend. What does that really mean? Well, it means that Arkansas's first home game in football in Fayetteville, where they could actually bring recruits in, was this weekend, and it's the only weekend in September. So it was one opportunity this month to get players in. Well, Koa Pete, I'd learned late in the week, probably wasn't coming in. I wasn't able to get a confirmation, a verification on that from another source. I just had one. So I wasn't sure how that would play out. But it seems to me I've seen no information where Koa Pete was on campus. What I have seen are photographs of John Calipari down in Florida near the Tampa area at the home of the legend Dick Vitale. You talk about basketball journalism, television, that he's the GOAT. You know, you can argue about that, but I think he is because I'm old school. But either way, long relationship there. Calipari's in Florida over the weekend. It seems pretty evident to me Arkansas didn't have any visitors for basketball over this weekend. So you went from maybe having 3 guys lined up to 2 of the 3 we know have now got dates set in October. And the source who told me that Koa Pete likely wasn't going to make it this weekend also said he still wants to visit and look down the road maybe during exhibition season. So it's something I talked about on my Hogville Net YouTube Live on Thursday. We're talking about it again today. And I think then it starts to help understand how the schedule and maybe why the university hasn't put out yet, because they're going to splash those exhibition game dates, confirming those games and putting the dates on there. Maybe the red-white scenario, there was talk from Calipari, 6 weeks ago, that they may play more than one intra-squad scrimmage for fans. Typically, that's in Fayetteville. I'm old school. Back in the day under Nolan, they'd spread it around. Pine Bluff, Little Rock. You know, they talked about Hot Springs, where they host the state high school championship finals games throughout a whole week every March. There's 5,000 or 6,000 seats in that venue. So there's opportunities to spread that around. Maybe a game in Fort Smith, even though it's really close enough to Fayetteville, you wonder. But the point is, there may be with at least one intra-squad scrimmage in Fayetteville on campus, plus the 2 exhibition games. One will be on the road, but we still don't know dates and when those are going to be played. And so my assumption is, I'm speculating Arkansas is going to drop the schedule all at once, including the exhibition matchups. They haven't always done it that way. A lot of times they'll kind of, piecemeal and trickle some of that stuff in. But this is John Calipari's program now. They maybe do things differently. So maybe we see everything all at once when they drop it. And then it might start answering some questions, because we went from thinking Arkansas was going to have 3 visitors this weekend to 0. They've got 3 visitors now scheduled for the weekend of October 18th to the 20th. On the 19th, that Saturday, Arkansas in football host LSU. But you're going to have 3 5-stars in the house. Chris Anak Jr., the 6'10" forward out of the class of 2025, a top 10 rated 5-star. Initially planned to come up this past weekend, has moved it off to that weekend. We've known for a while J.J. Andrews, class of 2026, in-state, Little Rock Christian Academy, 6'7" wing, top 15 rated 5-star. That's the way he's got 4 official visits. He took one this weekend to Missouri. That's the weekend he plans to visit Arkansas, again, that LSU football game. And then we learned Kingston Flemings, a 6'3" guard out of San Antonio, a top 20 rated 5-star, a lead guard. Arkansas's got a lead guard in Darius Afcuff Jr., who, by the way, plays at IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida, which is right in that Tampa area. My guess is, since we're in an open recruiting period, Cal's multitasking when he's down in that Tampa area. He's checking in on Dick Vitale, but he's also probably doing an in-home or going to IMG to see Darius Afcuff Jr., just me connecting dots. That's how he communicates on social media, by the way. You see him with friends and people he knows. He tweets those photos out in certain areas, Pittsburgh or where Atlanta, different places he's at, but he's also there recruiting. So that's just part of my speculation. But getting back to that weekend, Kingston Flemings, who just took part in Team USA Junior National 3-on-3 basketball, the World Cup over in Europe. He just did that, took part in that a couple of weeks ago, but he's considered by some to be arguably the best facilitator first, maybe leaning towards being more of a true point guard than most of the lead guards. Darius Afcuff Jr., top 5 rated 5-star, already committed to Arkansas. I think is a score first point guard. He will facilitate. Kingston Flemings, and we've seen Calipari over the years he's not bashful at all about recruiting high level players that that maybe play the same position or similar playing position wise, and he has shown that he can get minutes for guys, and it doesn't hurt their next level marketing and exposure. We saw it last year at Kentucky. He had 2 first-round guards that took turns playing lead guard. DJ Wagner was another guy battling an injury that did that. They had 4 guards when you had Antonio Reeves, a scorer and a situational lead guard in ISO situations more. But you had at least 4 guards that played on the ball a lot. So he's able to show players it's not going to hurt you to have a guy that can actually take some of the minutes doing some of the same things you do. It'll actually help you for the next level, because when you get to the NBA, those are things you face. All right, getting back to the visit, though, those 3 guys now slated for that October 18th through 20 weekend. And then Malik Thomas, the 5-star guard that Arkansas, he postponed the visit in late June after visiting UConn. He then set it up for this past weekend, September 13th through 15th. He's now moved on from that. We reported that last week, confirmed it. He's now going to come in on October 4th through the 6th. And that's a weekend that Arkansas hosts Tennessee in football at Reynolds Razorback Stadium. So he's now slated for that weekend. Now, I said all that to say, let's see where some of these games drop. Does Arkansas host Kansas in that exhibition game on an off weekend? Arkansas has an off week in mid-October, the 11th through the 13th, where basketball could have all the headlines and bring players in. Or is that when they do the red-white game? There's a lot to still learn. They can use those opportunities to bring players in. But Arkansas does have still a September visitor scheduled for next weekend. No football game at home. Arkansas is on the road at Auburn. Mika Mirinen, a 6'11 stretch four out of Finland, plays at Arizona Campus Prep, a 5-star top 10 rated guy. No surprise there in 2026. But I'm told, quote unquote, he's a strong candidate to reclass, which would mean 2025, which would add a sense of urgency. He's got 3 or 4 other visits set up. I believe he took one this weekend, but pay attention to that. So next weekend, Arkansas could have its first visitor since Darius Acup Jr. all the way back in May.
Yeah, I mean, when by we, I mean, you've been tracking these since all the way back and when Acup committed, and obviously it should be interesting with the different football weekends coming up. You and I talking a little bit before about, Arkansas has such a good home schedule football-wise this year that they're going to have a couple really special environments. And while a football game isn't by any means the end-all, be-all in a visit weekend, it does help when you talk about LSU. It's going to be a night game. That place is going to be packed. It's going to be a lot of fun. And in terms of the scheduling exhibition-wise, you make a good point, right, about that bye week in October. We don't know that that's when something's going to be scheduled, but last year, Purdue, that fell on a bye week, and they used it. They put it Saturday afternoon. It was all that was going on in Fayetteville, and that created a pretty special atmosphere. Sold out Bud Walton was one of the cooler experiences exhibition-wise around the entire country. It wouldn't be surprising to see them put some form of exhibition when they have the spotlight, no football going on, center stage in Fayetteville.
Well, and I told you I ranked my top 20 games. Had I waited for the school to put out these exhibition dates, and then maybe we learned that Calipari's lining up a mega visit weekend, I might have been tempted to throw an exhibition game into my top 20 rankings. But I remember last year where Arkansas beats Purdue, a team projected to be a national title contender. Sure enough, Purdue wins the Big Ten again, makes it all the way to the title game, loses to that juggernaut UConn in the title game. But what did it mean for Arkansas? Not a whole lot. You didn't get any value in that, and the team, the season basically tanked. So, I'm leery of, I mentioned those in my article, but I not knowing playing dates, not knowing exactly how they're going to use that for recruiting. I think those games can help Arkansas get ready for the regular season. And I think, especially with Baylor at the end of your first week of the regular season at a neutral site, maybe playing TCU on the road or neutral site if it ends up being in Dallas, and playing Kansas and Bud Walton, that level of competition. Maybe those things help get you ready. But in terms of the recruiting part now is what I'm really dialed in on, because I think these are huge opportunities to take advantage of that kind of a atmosphere that you're going to have. And I'm really, again, curious to see how they sort all that out, and if in fact they do play more than one red-white game, more than one intra-squad scrimmage, as it was talked about a few weeks ago by Calipari.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting just from a basketball atmosphere standpoint too, right? Last year they had Duke and they were able to kind of center that around, bring a couple pieces in visit-wise, but you were obviously speculating. We've talked about this a couple weeks in a row. Hey, maybe a marquee game in Bud Walton. That didn't really happen. You look at the neutral site games, they go on the road to Miami. So obviously once SEC play rolls around, you've got opportunities, but that's not till February. So in terms of visits and getting people in the fall to see a packed Bud Walton, maybe that's what Kansas is, right? Because, I mean, in terms of visits and recruits potentially being able to see that, they're not really going to have that opportunity like they did last year just because of how the scheduling fell. Awesome slate in the non-con, not a lot of marquee games in Bud Walton.
That's it. If you look at the regular season, it'll be Ole Miss will be the first high major program you play in game 2 of your, early mid January. So you're right. That's why I'm really dialed in now. I always was if that matchup was going to happen. But once this final game dropped, and I realized there is no early November game, no opportunity before the early signing period, which I think runs this year from the maybe November 13th through the 20th, something like that. Arkansas actually has a football game in early November at home against, I think, Ole Miss.
Ole Miss, yep.
So in theory, you could bring a visitor in there and still have time to bring them in to visit from that 2025 class, and they still sign early. But for basketball, you nailed it. I mean, you don't have it unless you count the Kansas game. And John Calipari is a different kind of recruiter. He understands how to not only make matchups, but how to make them make sense in more than just one. I mentioned he's a multitasker. As much as he loves Dick Vitale, he's down there for a guy that's been through a lot dealing with cancer. And I don't pretend to know all the details on that. They put out a nice little video today. He put out photos yesterday and a video then today. But Calipari's been down there this weekend, and I don't think it was, I think he's making the most of his opportunity down there, not only to catch up with Dickie V, but I would guess he was on that IMG Academy campus at some point. He's due back in Arkansas, by the way, if he's not already home today, tomorrow for an engagement near Central Arkansas tomorrow. That's on his schedule. But, this is interesting to me, these recruiting dynamics with John Calipari, because even though we're starting to get used to the idea of top 10 rated 5-star, setting up visits, going out to see them. And don't forget these guys that are shuffling around visits. When the recruiting period opened up a week ago Wednesday, Calipari went out to see all these top names in person that we're talking about that are coming in for visits. So it's not like he's wasting his time and that they're just, randomly scheduling visits that may or may not happen. I think there's a method to the madness, and I think things have intentionally been moved around. And we'll see if that turns out to be true.
Yeah, absolutely. The exhibitions we're still waiting on. We'll see when those drop. Should be interesting to see. And is there anything else you want to hit before we go, Kevin?
Well, they did have a fantasy camp last week with guys like Joe Johnson, Todd Day, a bunch of high-level guys that played at Arkansas. And then for the football game, the home opener, you had Jalen Williams, Nick Smith Jr., Kamani Johnson. We had some basketball, they're not recruits anymore, but those are the kind of guys, the more they're around the program and you see those photo ops, you're going to see, I think that does help your recruiting.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about that, obviously, with the Mavs guys coming in when it's just, Cal doesn't need any help recruiting-wise, right? But it helps in multiple facets, right? You get those guys around the program, it helps your team, the buy-in and just seeing those guys in the building, but also from a recruiting standpoint when you're able to just, PJ Washington was here. Just roll off the names, right? Daniel Gafford shows up to practice. It certainly helps a lot. But that's going to do it for this week's Hog Hoops Report. That's Kevin McPherson. I'm Jacob Morris. We'll talk to you next week. More Picture Show coming up after the break.